Welcome back. Welcome back. Please find your seats and we'll get started here in just about a minute. We'll give a couple seconds left for for people coming in and trickling in the back, and then we will have those videos that have been long anticipated by Senator Tim Kaine and Congressman Rob Whitman lined up here in a second. Okay.
Hey everybody, Senator Tim Kaine here. As a senator from Virginia, which is home to thousands of Marines and the proud parent of a Marine veteran, I'm excited to virtually join you all today for this symposium. I want to start by thanking all of our service members for your service to our country. I'm sure you've already heard from some terrific speakers about today's logistics environment and the many challenges as resource allocation, sustainability, and technological integration, just to name a few. But these aren't just challenges, they're opportunities to demonstrate the kind of leadership that inspires change. It's up to you all to seize these opportunities, which is why it's great that you're gathered here today to discuss them. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and chair of the Sea Power Subcommittee, which oversees Navy and Marine operations, I'm proud to continue to lead efforts to help strengthen support for the Department of Defense and its supportive industries, including by helping secure pay raises for military service members in the DoD civilian workforce. I've also worked to successfully secure various provisions to strengthen and expand access to quality health care for service members and dependents with a focus on improving mental health services. But there's a lot more work to be done, and I look forward to continuing to work together with you to secure more wins. Congratulations to AMCL on another successful logistics symposium, and best wishes to all for a very productive event.
Well, hello, folks. I wish I could be there with you in person, but I really appreciate the Global Expeditionary Logistics Symposium for putting on this year's effort to discuss what is remarkably important for this nation. That is logistics in the fighting stance, competition, crisis, and conflict. We have to make sure we are properly positioned to do logistics in a contested environment. Highly contested environment is going to be what we face inside the first island chain. And we have to think about things creatively. We have to be able to use autonomy. We have to understand that the capacity and capability that are going to be generated through expendable and attritable platforms are going to be the key to victory in that space. We want to make sure, too, that we are understanding that we are not going to be able to move our logistical elements into theater in a highly contested environment. That means you're going to fight with what you've got. So we want to make sure we pre-position supplies in critical places, make sure we have intra-theater connectors to assure that we have continuity in operations. Also, we want to make sure we're using additive manufacturing so we can produce things in theater. 3D printing is going to be key. We want to make sure, too, that we secure critical supply webs and make sure they're not single dimension in supply chains. Redundancy and layering in supplies are going to be key to make sure we can sustain operations. More robust interoperability is going to be key in that space. The Marine Corps and the Navy are going to have to be able to operate in joint efforts with the Army and the Air Force and with other nations. Those efforts are going to be critically important for us to be successful in theater. We have to understand the capability of China. China has the ability to hold us at risk at longer and longer ranges, which means that's a bigger challenge for us strategically. We understand, too, that they have built a large number of ships. In fact, I would argue now equal us in both quantity and quality of ships. They have a capability that's 232 times greater than our capability to build ships. They have a greater ability to maintain ships. All those things are going to play in this future environment. Logistics is going to be key, and especially when we are fighting an away game. We have to be able to sustain, and sustainment becomes very difficult when you deal with the tyranny of distance. So I appreciate you all inviting me to speak. I appreciate you all having a very intense and creative conversation about the path forward, How do we do things at the speed of relevance? How do we make sure, too, that we are using our dollars more effectively and more efficiently than the Chinese are utilizing their yuan? That's how we will win this strategic competition. Folks, this is about us creating the capability and the capacity to deter the Chinese. Peace through strength is the greatest deterrent that we have. And we can do this. We are the most imaginative and creative nation on the face of the earth. And we will be able to counter the Chinese. We will be able to deter them. And we will do that with the incredible efforts that each and every one of you put forward. Folks, I thank each of you. I wish you each God's continued blessings. And may God bless our great United States of America.
So as you can tell, neither the congressman or the senator could be here in person, but these were not cookie cutter videos. They recorded specifically for this audience, so a great appreciation for them taking out their time and being able to do that for us. What we're going to do now is we're going to move into the daily wargaming scene setter, so that way you know what tomorrow's morning is going to be like and be able to showcase a few things. And here to do that is a fine gentleman named Travis Reese. Travis retired from the Marine Corps as a lieutenant colonel after 21 years of service. During his active duty time, he serves as an artillery officer in a multitude of billets, including capabilities development, future scenario design, and institutional strategy. Since his retirement in 2016, he co-developed the Joint Force Operations Scenario Process. And currently, Mr. Reese is the Director of Wargaming and Net Assessment for Troika Solutions in Reston, Virginia. If everyone can, give it up for Mr. Travis Reese.
Set. All right, good morning, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. First of all, I'd like to give a thanks to the AV team as they've been setting up some of the audio visuals today, and we're going to do a little bit of live experimentation with you as well, but hopefully some good visualization. And Congressman Whitman's notes could not have been a more perfect setup for what we're about to do today. So, and also, really want to thank Kirk, Greg Lewis, and Rob Cranston for giving us this opportunity to take this unusual path to helping you orient to the problem today, and certainly introduce a little bit more of wargaming and the dynamics of wargaming that we can use across our organizations to really immerse ourselves in the scenarios that we're going to face, visualize them a little bit better, and hopefully come up with some more cogent solutions too. Certainly, I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce you to my team. So certainly this year is kind of a returner with me is Kurt Hudson, who's a senior researcher and wargamer with MITRE Corporation, doing a lot of support right now to Army Futures Command. And you see him just about everywhere. Talented game designer, certainly one of the most solid professionals that I know. And I've had the pleasure of being able to just share professional notes with Kurt for a while. He's going to be doing our analysis and synthesis section today, so we'll talk about that a little bit. Also, Kevin Williamson today joins us from Battle Road Digital, and we're going to be using their Atom Engine capability that'll be on display as well, which will be the visualization tool and the model that will apply to this war game today. And certainly, Kevin is a up-and-comer right now in the wargaming world. You've probably seen him doing a lot of stuff at Marine Corps University. He's currently supporting CSIS also, visiting and developing war games for them, and is now joined the development team here at Battle Road and helping bring a tool that for campaign modeling I think you'll find pretty exciting. And for those both looking for ways to visualize for your organizations, improve your planning, improve your wargaming functions when you do some of your planning, this is a great tool. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we were able to do some solid demonstrations. Picking up from last year. So what did we do last year at AMCL to introduce some of the wargaming capabilities? Well, last year we tried to remove a little bit of the abstraction from the problem, as Congressman Whitman was talking about, and give everybody a more solid appreciation of the challenges we were facing in the contested logistics environment. So we held a panel last year, laid out 3 different vignettes from a tactical all the way through a strategic level scenario, including installations and their challenges that are unique to some of the installations, some of the logistics infrastructure that we require. The panelists that we had helped kind of form the audience's appreciation of the problem, and then we wrote a report for AMCL that was sent out last year that encompassed all the scenarios and the problem framing that we did around it. So for those who've been able to read that report, you can find it online. And then this year, we'll also produce a report from this particular game talking about the way that the model helped us generate some of our understanding and also give you the vignettes. And by the way, vignettes are not proprietary. Feel free to use them. They're designed to stimulate conversation and initiate other war games across the across DoD and any of the other interested organizations. Certainly, they're more Marine Corps focused, but it's applicable anywhere. This is under a joint force scenario design. So a little bit of context setting for today. When you look at this, we're going to do we're going to try and tackle a lot of topics in a very simple way. And so I'm going to share with you, the overarching scenario that we've designed. Kevin's going to walk you through a little bit of the simulation for how that would look or appear inside of the notional area of operations we've got. And then, Kurt at the end will do a little bit of synthesis analysis and also take some audience questions. One of the things that I want to put as a disclaimer up front is you're going to be, enjoying some of the presentation from the scenario and the visualization. But if you have questions, let's constrain ourselves to the scenario, not how the simulation works. We will be outside all day in the exhibit area, setting up in the wargaming section over there. You can come talk to us about manual games. You can see a closer appreciation of what Kevin's got and their particular tool. And also as kind of a fun introduction to three of the vendors that are here today who are talking about some potential solutions. Leviathan, Regent, and Orion are also featured inside this game. Battle Road was able to take some of their developers and introduce those capabilities, and they function within this scenario. So you're able to see an alternative from a program of record capability and some potential solutions that exist out there in the transportation and distribution space as well. Kind of cool, a little bit fun to play with. All right, let's walk you on to the scenario. So I apologize if I pull from my notes a little bit. It's just complex enough that I want to get this right and put you all in the right frame of mind. So, every war game has a problem, purpose, and objective. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, what you should be able to see and what you should derive from the model, and we'll talk a little bit about the organization that you're going to see up on the display as well. So the scenario concept itself, this closely aligns to what we're currently seeing in Indo-Pacific area of responsibility. This is designed to connect you to some of the current operational issues, but we do not cross classification barriers. We're using a piece of geography that's notional compared to some of the other planning, if people are familiar with it. But it is representative enough of some of the challenges that we have between setting the theater, the locations we can be in, the paucity of locations we can be in, the numbers of allies and partners we're working with are all represented inside this scenario. This is basically pulling a combined joint task force, South Pacific region, as a U.S.-led standing CJTF. It's based in Lombrum Naval Station in Manus Island, Papua New Guinea, which is a real site and a real place, conducting ally and partner operations within this AO. And the AO stretches from the Andaman Sea through the Strait of Malacca and operating in the operating environs of Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands. So what you're looking at from our geography for this AO is basically something that stretches 4,500 miles east to west and 1,300 miles north to south. South of the Philippines and all the way into the north of Darwin, and excluding Australia as part of the AO. That's important because you really get a sense of what are we talking about from time, distance, and literally how few locations we actually have to be able to set the theater based on where our host nations and partners are prepared to introduce us and the things that we're allowed to contribute. The mission for the CJTF is mostly going to focus on partner training, security cooperation, maritime domain awareness, operations, coordinating with the other nations in the region for them to address activities that address the People's Republic of China impact on their sovereignty and access to their economic exclusion zones. Actions include counter illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, law enforcement operations, intelligence exchanges, coordinating regional response to illegal attempts by the PRC to emplace extractive industry vessels and illegally exploit petroleum and mineral resources in the region. The Combined Joint Forces Maritime Component Command, so that component for the CJTF that covers all of our naval assets, is Marine Corps, Navy, and Coast Guard units providing a range of capabilities and responses from aviation, surface, ground, subsurface. We'll talk about the task organization in a little bit. Combined Joint Force, there's a CJFSOC, also a Combined Land Forces Component Command, principally conducting partner training across a range of functional areas. A Combined Joint Force Air Component Command, elements conducting air training and air operations activities with host nations. The context for this is, and we're set in around the year 2027, As tensions begin to grow in and around Taiwan, the People's Republic of China, via the PLA Navy and PLA Air Force, attempt to retain access to key maritime and air corridors in the CJTF's area of operation. And we're excluding, and this also will include the AUKUS partnership as well. It's the ability to, and we're looking at how AUKUS has the ability to support operations in the adjacent Combined Joint Task Force Japan-Philippines, again, a notional task force, and prevent the PRC attempts to force unification with Taiwan. CJTF SPR is an economy of force mission, and as such is much less weighted in air, land, and sea combat capability. So what you're facing is an organization here that is within a very difficult theater, is getting fewer resources and fewer places to establish themselves. All right, let's talk about the challenge that's set up in this game. Specifically, we're kind of tackling 3 different issues. One of them is we only really have 2 nodes to set the theater, Singapore and Manus Island, and they're 4,500 miles apart. That ain't helpful. But we also know that they're subject to host nation caveats and restrictions. So the things that we're going to be in place in there for the sustainment and maintenance of the force are not going to be everything we would want to have at the start or initiation of conflict. It's going to be subject to host nation caveats. So the things that are put in there are basically ones that will allow us to likely not introduce armed or offensive capabilities, principally built around some basic sustainment. We're looking at probably classes 1, some 3, no 5 at this point in time, and 9, so repair parts. So that'll be kind of the dominant variables that we're looking at putting in here. And the real point of this is that no nation is going to become a target until they're ready to become a target. So we will be looking at a crisis surge phase inside of this scenario as well, and then we'll talk about that transition into armed conflict, and we'll talk about the sustainment deficit that will probably occur in the subsequent vignettes. So for this one, right now, we're just trying to set the theater, be good partners and allies, gain access basing and overflight, and then establish the normal patterns of operations that we would have in there, preparing for like a crisis. I'll add the last little piece to this. The 2 most essential components to setting any of this theater are actually logistics and communications networks and nodes. And particularly for when you think about what Congressman Whitman referred to as sustainment webs, that really refers to the ability to have that total asset visibility and from any source and node, know that we can effectively achieve efficiencies as much as we can eke out in this resilient environment by basically being able to have access to each other's sustainment and maintenance capabilities when we aren't able to provide for ourselves organically or separated. That level of visibility requires an immense amount of data and a high-quality networks to be able to transmit that so that those features of sustainment that are already in that theater can move quickly and with resilience. When it comes to setting the theater logistically, last year we posited inside the scenarios, hey, there's a good probability that logistics contributes to integrated deterrence. If your adversary is aware that not only that you will have sustainment supply and other supplies inside that theater, but you can take the first punch and then put your forces back into the fight, what does that do to adjust their calculus relative to whether they're willing to initiate armed conflict or not? So keep that thought in your mind as you look at this particular scenario. So day 1 right here, we're trying to establish our relationships with bases and partners, set up that deterrence relationship, establish those logistical nodes, create those resilient networks that work on a sustainment web, and then interoperate and operate with allies and partners on a daily basis and start to develop those coalition mechanisms that we're going to need to be able to facilitate our sustainment, maintenance, and distribution activities. All right, pausing there. I'm going to turn this over to Kevin. Kevin's going to walk you through a little bit of the scenario and what we're presenting, and then give you sort of a feel for the daily pattern of life inside this scenario.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Kevin. So I'm going to caveat this with saying that this is a development build, so let's hope Murphy's Law doesn't happen. So the first thing I'm going to do is explain what this is. So this is what we call Atom Engine. It's a 3D physics-based modeling and sim platform. So it's a little bit different to Command PE, if you're familiar with that, in the sense that it's not built for one purpose in mind. It's really just a sandbox tool, so whatever you want to use it for, we try to make it modular with that. So for the use case today, what I'd like to point out with this is it does a lot of like good time, space, and distance. So when you're looking at logistics, afterwards, if you want to come over and say, hey, What happens if we send a Watson from here to there? How long does it take? Feel free to ask me those questions. So for the purpose of the vignette, I'm just going to orient you to the geography and forces before I actually hit play. So like Travis mentioned, the vignette, we're really just focusing on this piece of geography down here. But we do have some stuff built out over here in China's mainland and South China Sea just to give you that immersive world building visualization while the red forces are establishing their pattern of life, and they will move once we hit play. We've also got some air missions out here just to kind of project strength. Alternatively, the green forces on the map are going to be outlined by Travis's order of battle, so think local security forces, regional partners, air defense, things like that. And then, like he mentioned, we do have some non-program of record capabilities in here, like Leviathan's nautical sea skimming transports. We've got this Viceroy Electric. It's a new transportation type ship. And then if we go in a little bit further, we do have some new LMVs. I believe they're from Orion. And they're going to actually aggregate on top of these ships once we hit play. So really look at this as a visualization of what's going on and not actually the ground truth.
By the way, as Kevin continues, I failed to provide the order battle. We'll do that after he does the setup, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the forces that are there.
So right now I'm running it at about 300 times real time just to give you an idea of the time, space, and distance. So what we're seeing right now is this Leviathan nautical airlift transport actually creating a route to go towards Darwin, and they're establishing a pattern of life. And you can see they're moving significantly faster than this USNS Watson for their destination. Down here, we actually have some vessels that dropped off this Mew, and they're also going to be heading towards Darwin. You can see our fighters going out there to project power, stuff coming down from Singapore into Darwin. And then just as a comparison, just to show you the kind of things you can do, is we just put a Watson paired up with another Leviathan transport just to give you an idea of how far they can actually cover the distance compared to something like the Watson. So think scalability. So now that we've gone through all that, I'll speed it up a little bit just so you can kind of get an idea. And through play testing it last night, this will be about a 5-day baseline. So whatever you see here, the routes, you know, just scale that up. So 5 times 6 if you want to go for a month, so on and so forth. But some of the other things that you can do with the tool, so I'll just speed it up just in the interest of time. It does have a full day-night cycle. So you could see these non-program of record capabilities. You know, some of the vendors here, we put their data inside of here, and they're moving much faster. They're going off the specifications they gave us. So when you think about, you know, the future, what kind of things that we can enable to get us the things that we want quicker, faster, sooner, you know, there's a whole lot of possibilities here in wargaming and simulations, just a way that you can kind of get a good baseline of whether it's an idea to explore or not. And then finally, I'll show you some layers before I turn it over to Kurt. So we do things like ocean currents and depth. So even though you just saw the global shipping lanes and things just being pre-routed, we do actually take into effect the ocean current and depth. So when you look at fuel consumption rate, you know, how much fuel do I actually need depending on the time of the year, the strength of the currents, things like that. That's something that this tool has the capability of doing. And with that, I will turn it over to Kurt.
Thanks. Yep. I'm sorry, as I do a little bit of reclama, we rehearsed and we still messed it up, so I'll get back into this. So first of all, one of the things you're not going to see necessarily is volume sustainment. We've shown a lot of the transportation features. We can talk a little bit about that later. There's some of those components within this model. One of the things that, for reference to, if you want to look back at how we derived some of our appreciations of this space, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Katzman wrote his Naval War College paper, and then subsequently a War on the Rocks article about the sustainability of EAB operations within a scenario like this. And in fact, it's almost the exact same geography. So his consumption tables referenced, particularly for class 1, 3, and 5, are kind of interesting and relevant here when you look at what we're trying to move in terms of volume and set the theater. For the order of battle, I failed to provide you the Combined Forces Joint Maritime Component Commander is basically made up of a notional task force off the 7th Fleet, so Task Force 77. The Marine headquarters in there, we created a task group 771, which is a det from the 31st MEU, which is embarked on an LPD. They also have one detachment of ground-based VMFA F-35Bs, a detachment of HMLA, so H-1Zs and UH-1Ys, one VMM, one HMH, one DET VMGR from C-130s, an MLR minus, so looking at some of the fires EAB capabilities and what the future littoral logistics battalions will provide for their support and contact teams to either run FARPs or sustain some of the EABs. And for those who aren't familiar with a lot of those acronyms, happily I will go back and do a reclam a little bit later. And we also provided some of the information capabilities from a Marine Information Group. From the Navy side of the house, we put out one surface action group. So again, that minimum theater, and this particular surface action group is an unusual task group of one DDG and one LCS with naval strike missile capability. The LPD that's supporting the MU, two notional SSNs, and then we provided an unclear tasking for an unmanned surface, subsurface, and other capabilities detachments and unmanned aerial systems detachments. So what we see represented in some of those future capabilities are sort of covering that unmanned bubble besides that which is a program of record. We've got a DET from 2x P8s from an MPRA doing that mission set, and then one land-based DET of Air Force F-35Cs. And then one national security cutter. Red, of course, is represented in the Southern Theater Command, and so looking at some of their future capabilities as they're developing more, not only of their surface fleets and actions, and also air forces, but potentially a carrier capability. Green, in this case, is Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomons. And our logistic nodes, as we mentioned before, are only two pre-position sites in Singapore and Papua New Guinea, and with the regional logistics sustainment area in Australia coming out of the Marine Rotational Forces Darwin and those sites that have been set up there, which, by the way, are not proper to this AO, nor are they global positioning network sites. There just happen to be ways that we're able to transship and store Marine Corps capabilities. Our joint logistics enterprise support in this particular case is the Naval Regional Combatant Logistics Forces, so ComLog Westpac that you currently know in Singapore, Transcom Air Channel Routes, Maritime Sustainment Command with their liner and service routes, and USNS's Fleet Logistics Center Singapore, and those things that are coming from the Marine Corps Logistics Command in Blunt Island that supports the GPN capabilities at Site 2, and also which is in Manus Island, and with some preposition capabilities in Singapore. And then lastly, leveraging the Marine Rotational Forces in Darwin and being able to set that as a subsequent logistics node. All right, so sorry for the backtrack. Hopefully that makes the icons a little clearer, and we can literally drill down into deeper detail later outside at the table if you want to take a look at microcosmically at what some of those compositions look like. All right, over to you, Kurt. I apologize.
Good morning. I'm from South Boston. If you don't understand what I'm saying, I will speak slower. Okay. Why are we here? Why are we doing a stage setting each morning based on the war game Kevin and Travis just described? We're focused on the challenge of a theater that's incredibly large and diverse. If you take a look around the theater, we've got Department of Defense represented, all the services. We've got lots of agencies represented. We've got contractors of all flavors represented, and we've actually got some allies and partners present as well. That's important because each day the briefings are oriented on kind of the tasks in the vignettes for each day. So the audience will be able to contribute directly to possible solutions to the types of challenges you'll see in the simulation. That's pretty exciting where I'm sitting, and look forward to hearing your comments and questions throughout the remainder of the symposium. The challenge today is how do we place sufficient supply, maintenance, transportation means in our joint operating area while also keeping an eye on two potential transitions, transition to crisis and worst case transition to conflict. And those could be very quick, those could be long. You never know, right, based on your indications and warnings, how much time you have. So in this phase, as part of setting the theater, you'll want to think about the core principles of Marine Corps logistics, the expeditionary focus, flexibility, adaptability, joint and combined operations, so that as you begin to set the theater, you can create conditions for potential crisis and conflict in the future, right? What you can do today, you may not have to redo tomorrow. As Travis and Kevin and I started this work a couple of months ago, we were thinking about the scope and the scale of various military problems found in the area of operations. And we thought, how do we approach problem solving? How do we even define a problem we might be able to solve in competition based on the forces available, the resources available against the tyranny of distance? And what we went back to was kind of Joint Pub 4.0 and MCDP 4.0 and said, let's look at what the doctrine gives us as a potential thought framework to help begin to scale this down into our particular operating area. Sometimes in my experience, when you're working on really big problems that get everybody in the room really excited because they want to help, you can get trapped in admiring the problem through endless discussion, right? So that was the other reason we thought, how do we frame this to help you, the audience, provide some meaningful feedback we can incorporate into the post-symposium report, which your comments will help write. We'll have Kevin catch everybody's names so that you can get credit in the paper later. You'll be fine. So let's talk about the structure. I covered the core principles of Marine Corps logistics, and I'm not a logistician by trade, as Travis pointed out, so I look forward to learning from everyone as well. The key elements, though, of those principles are things that we're going to look at today, in particular: logistics as a warfighting function, expeditionary logistics, joint combined operations. An underlying thread across all 3 days, as Kevin and Travis both touched on, with program of record and non-program of record input, is how does technology innovation in every vignette help us find potential components of a solution? I think we'd all agree there's probably not a panacea or a silver bullet, one thing, whatever you define thing as, technology, idea, decision, that would solve a single military problem in this particular setting. So looking at joint problem solving, identifying components of a potential solution, help begin to act on those ideas so that we don't get caught in a circular firing squad of endless discussion admiring the problem. As you think through that, pre-positioning, rapid deployment, the sheer challenge of day-to-day sustainment over a 4,500-mile wide area of operations, maintenance, evacuation problems, all overlaid with allied and partner interests and operating guidance. When you then go into, well, how do I define my military problem, and you start to try to frame it, probably some questions that we talked about that may be relevant. What are my possible desired conditions at my end state? Conditions at end state, right? Helps me to write my desired end state, usually, in a logical pattern. What changes need to be made based on my force structure, capabilities, capacities, my current provided by my higher headquarters risk to mission, risk to force, right? Against what changes don't need to be made. If I don't know how much time I have because we're in competition, and therefore I can't rely on any additional resources, more than likely, unless they're related to particular events like an exercise or, say, a reaction to a humanitarian disaster, what doesn't change becomes part of a condition that may help me later, right? Sometimes I think we focus on change as a necessity, but we don't analyze the change that's going on around us every day, what changes need to be made, what things may remain the same, and that may be temporal, right? It's okay, but focus on change. When you talk allies and partners, you got to analyze what conditions are in their desired end state, and if they provided you their desired end state, you'll probably find challenges and opportunities where you can develop synergy in competition with your allies and partners with that type of question asking, right? Analysis. And in that, you find those two onerous things in developing your facts and assumptions, your constraints and your limitations. Constraints, things I must do, right? Probably tasks provided by my higher headquarters, for example. And then limitations, things I can't do, restrictions that may be imposed by weather or other environmental conditions, things that may be imposed by the nature of my relationship with my allies and partners, right? Helps you scope the problem, helps you define the problem, helps you begin to define conditions for a desired end state. And in that regard, how do you then begin to pull out components of the solution? How do you array challenges against solutions to identify opportunities? I'm very comfortable with that .mil-PF framework. You can break that down into force structure, capability, capacity, topped off with risk to mission, risk to force. Begin to define what acceptable conditions are required for you as a commander to make decisions, right? Think through that. That, for me, is always a challenge. As you do that, you then start looking at resources available. Keep an eye on technology and innovation. What can I do differently day to day to help offset the challenge of the time and distance of my operating area? How can my allies and partners help me offset some of my potentially, capacity shortages, for example, right? As you think through that, I would also start to close with, when I think about conditions in the environment, the ones I control, the ones I influence, the ones I mitigate usually red or threat related. How does it impact my operations? We think that as we move forward in time and we begin to continue to modernize the force and field new tech and gear, we'll have increased efficiency, improved situational awareness, improved decision-making, which will allow greater flexibility while naturally, we think, reduce risk. I would offer you red team that, and you green team that, and you redefine where you think your force structure, your capes, and your defined risk are then impacted by those perceived advantages you're probably making in your assumptions. The last thing I'd offer is there are probably conditions in the environment that are gray. And what does that mean? That means those are conditions that affect all sides equally, we think. It's one assumption. Some of those are probably cybersecurity, interoperability with allies and partners, training and cost of operations with allies and partners. When you get into operability, you begin to look ahead. How do I transition to crisis? What can the industrial base of a partner do if it changes from competition footing to crisis footing? Where can we find interoperability even if we don't field similar systems? A simple example might be whole blood. Always a challenge, right? Think about our medical models over the last 20 some odd years. 3 to 12 casualties at one point in CJTF Iraq was considered a mass casualty event in that theater. When you look at the transition of this theater and the definition of large-scale combat operations, that's probably in minutes to hours. What can the host nation do to offset some critical capacities outside of the obvious interoperability challenges? Some of our partners aren't going to be able to buy F-35As from us 20 years from now, right? So maybe interoperability at a major system level is not the goal. Maybe it's a practical interoperability that offsets tyranny, distance, and our known capacity challenges in some of our critical areas of supply like Class 8. That's just an example. Gave you a lot to think about there. Tried to give you the military problem-solving method as a framework to begin your thinking. And what I used to tell my staff was, I like to begin thinking before I actually think. And that's research, and that's conversation with people that can teach you something, like your subject matter experts. So as I close our first vignette, I look forward to learning from all the logistics professionals in the room, because I don't know what it is, I just want more of it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kurt, for the wrap-up. So everybody, at this point in time, you know that you've got an appreciation of a particular problem. We've presented you with some ways to immerse yourself in that understanding. We've identified things that we have discovered just simply from modeling this environment that are considerations that are going to be treated throughout this entire day. last piece, we'd originally designed it, the opportunity to take a few questions from the audience to sort of help do some collective framing, but we're going to be available outside. I think, Brandon, we run short of time right now. So if you got to give us the hook, we're ready to be outside and, you know, entertain any dialogue throughout the day and run this scenario and see what you guys come up with. You do? All right, very well. In that case, we do have questions or time for
Or
questions.
comments, yeah.
So, or comments, for heaven's sake. So if anybody has something that they would like to, you know, see or ask if it's reflected in the model, we're happy to take those too. And using the microphones provided as well.
Sure.
Good to see you again. Good to see you too. My name is Dave Reese. You built this on functional components, if I understood it right.
Correct.
Yet you have ownership of sites on the ground that are going to pertain to service.
That's a great question.
How are you mixing those two things?
Okay, so when you think about it from this perspective, which is in the set the theater phase right now, even though we've established this CJTF, every single one of the services are still responsible for the trans, man, and equip, and certainly their service unique logistics requirements. So at some point in time, we're looking at a situation where Commandant of the Marine Corps must furnish to the components within the theater, the Marine Forces, service components, those things which they're going to need to be able to operate and function within that theater, and certainly as the condition is set or the requirements set by the geographic combatant commander, and in this case, we've kind of migrated it down to that combined joint force commander too within that AO. So many of these sites, in terms of a set the theater environment, pre-armed conflict, are going to be service managed on behalf of whatever those AOs are, and they're probably going to be collective sites as well. So you would see concurrently Army Unique Logistics, Air Force, you know, take your pick of things as they're trying to wrestle through how they're going to do agile combat employment and still, you know, not do it in the way that they've normally done it from their position logistics too. So the point being is we anticipate there's going to be a service slice in there. It's unique. It's part of that sustainment function. It's going to have to be provided by the service, and it's going to have to be representative of those things that keep that organization in the fight to participate in the joint componency structure. Howie?
Hi, Travis. Just a follow-on to that one. When I was embedded with 9PTSC in Korea, ASOS, right, Army Support Other Services, was a huge factor for supporting, you know, Mark 4K in that scenario. How many assumptions, are we making assumptions? Do we know what to expect from ASOS? How are we factoring that in?
So this is a great discussion too, and for all the INL policy guys in here and guys from LogCom and everybody else who's sort of muscling through how these arrangements are being made right now, one of the things that we could certainly say is that our expansion in the theater doing basically an increase in the prepositioning programs for all intents and purposes. And so for those who understand Marine Corps legacy prepositioning, afloat, maritime preposition squadrons, and ashore, Marine Corps prepositioning networks up in Norway, and the ones that we've done from ad hoc side of the house for OEF and OIF are going to be now more of a permanent and ubiquitous relationship there. And everything that we're trying to do, not only from our own service sustainment, interoperability with the other services, and then finally, everything we're trying to build into a regional sustainment framework. So where are the places and nodes that exist overseas inside of this theater that then we're going to be able to say, all right, Harris Radio in South Korea is perfectly good. We don't have to evac this all the way back to the US in order to repair this piece of equipment. Every single one of those operational contracting roles that we're dealing with in all of those different vehicles, from AXA to, you know, LogCap to take your pick, are going to be huge requirements to make this work. And oh, by the way, if you're talking about a contracted solution, everybody's competing for the same pool of contractors. So if you thought it was just, you know, you would be able to get there and furnish your requirements faster, that's going to be a whole wrestling match in and of itself too. So that which you do for yourself and that which we must do with others are going to combine, and it's going to get very, very interesting. And trying to, again, feature that within the wargaming scenario, things that come out of that. Oh, you got a site? What does it take to make that work? We could wargame this down to the micro-tactical level. How does a global positioning network site not only function in the day-to-day, but what are all the other entities that are there and on that site? That gets interesting even from a mission insurance and force protection standpoint, let alone how do you make this thing work the way it's supposed to? There is no safe haven. There's no safe sites to operate from. Nothing is permissive, which again was a condition for all MPF operations previously and even for pre-positioning. You know, we had a reasonable assurance that you could pull up to the driveway in Norway and get your stuff before something slimed you on a front that was so far away. That ain't the case anymore, and add in a cyber and space operation. Now logisticians are literally fighting their way to give sustainment. Questions or comments? Anyone else?
Please, sure.
Good morning. I'm Commander Nishida, coming from Sponge staff, Gate officer to US staff. So that I want to know what we are doing, the surrounded by Chinese Navy, JSDF. But seriously, I want to know why you are choosing this theater, not North West Pacific side. So that in other words, Okinawa, Japan is too close to them, or how do you?
No. So the reason why we did this, and that's a great question, was to represent the problem in the theater, but to not cross over into real plans. So we didn't exclude it because we didn't think it was important. We just wanted to have a piece of geography that we could all talk about kind of in the open with the same problems and not mix, potential classification. But you add another part to that, which is we had thought about all the different ways we could represent this, and we talked about even doing this globally. The same challenge exists in Africa, the same challenge exists in the Mediterranean and within the European regions at greater or lesser scale. This one's just the most demanding. So we picked this one uniquely as our tactical scenario, and we also did it so that we gave some latitude to talk freely around other problems.
Sure, please.
Hey Travis, Paul Nelson, so I'm the Australian liaison to the Joint Staff J4. Thanks very much for the presentation and being someone that's from the region, very happy that we're having this conversation.
Yes.
One of the things I do wonder though, and you sort of touched on it, and that is one of demand signal, volume and velocity.
Yes.
We get to a point where these sorts of conversations or war games without some mathematics behind it become limited in their utility in terms of trying to describe or understand the problem in some further detail.
Very.
To what extent, if any, are you and the team looking at building out a master data assumptions list or something similar that seeks to describe the demand signal of the force in terms of volume and velocity so you can start to overlay that with the nodes, the links, or indeed the meshes that's described?
You literally put my to-do list out there, which is at some point in time, inside the vignettes, and we'll publish those in there, and we'll basically say, hey, look, these are the places where we think that we can draw some synergy from the host nations. In this particular theater, we get to cheat a little bit because we assume it'll be the one that'll be less challenged. And so potentially class 1 food, class 3, you may be able to contract a little bit in this scenario, so we could do an offset. The one that we're really struggling with right now is, for example, volume of lethal munitions and capabilities for class 5, we don't exactly know. And even for the fuel consumption rates, one of the things that we're going to try and pick up from, as I mentioned earlier, one of our source documents was RAND in 2013 did this scenario just to figure out what EABs would look like. And then Lieutenant Colonel Dan Katzman wrote his Naval War College paper and a War on the Rocks article that actually did some of the notional sustainment, and he focused only on classes 1, 3, and 5. So we've got some baseline tables pulled from that work. Now, I think that from the original scenario, it was a slightly higher estimate because it had more firing positions than I think we could support. But yeah, we intend to actually go back and do at least a couple representative data items here, probably excluding, say, Class 8 medical. Class 9, we don't have a really good sense for right now, how much the vehicles inside the different formations and other entities would require that kind of sustainment. That one's going to be a bit of a struggle, so we may not touch on it just to say, hey, look, we got a problem. But to your point, more specifically, one of the struggles that we're seeing right now in terms of even O-planning is how can I take those demand signals from those plans and then quantify or crunch those numbers to something that is becoming increasingly more capturable in terms of industrial base and defense industrial base and organic industrial base and what kind of production. I mean, even Bondiana, representative of what Australia has right now in their industrial base, everybody's eyeing that and trying to figure out what the calculus is for production. So yes, we intend to put some notional tables. They will probably be deeply unsatisfying, but we will try to represent that as best we can. Yeah, please.
Sure, if I could add one more comment. As Army Future Command has been experimenting on what they call Army 2030, Army 2040, what comes after multi-domain operations, one thing that the collective realized was all of our current planning models are based on coin. I gave you kind of an example when I talked about the medical. And so the first thing they had to do in that first 12 months of this 5-year cycle of research they're in, each capability developer had to go back, and in some cases go back to World War II planning models for large-scale combat operations and reset all of their planning models to even begin to work on an assumption list based on data. Something to think about. May not be a challenge for anybody in the room, but that was a heavy lift in that first year because the organization was trying to step off immediately with an aggressive experimentation schedule. And then when you tried to pull the data in and you tried to layer existing models into the war game so that as you played, you generated your data and you could look at it every day, the medical model literally broke. The numbers were so large that the model couldn't calculate it because it was that coin-based model where 3 to 12 a day was it. So just something to think about, because that was a great question.
All right, Al, thanks so much for your comments. I think that's the last of it. Brandon's got to give us the hook, but we will do 2 more of these. Tomorrow will be crisis, and then the last day will be armed conflict. And so we look forward to all your input.
And we're back on, as you go out, just stay right all the way back. We're on that wall. And you'll probably hear my South Boston accent.
See y'all. Thanks again. Have a good conference.